Welcome to Kent County High School Science and AP Biology free response question number 5. This is a 10-point question. We normally plan on budgeting about 22 minutes for questions 1 and 2, which are the 10-pointers on the exam. Here's our setup. Many species have circadian rhythms that exhibit an approximately 24-hour cycle. Circadian rhythms are controlled by both genetics and environmental conditions, including light. Researchers investigated the effect of light on mouse behavior by using a running wheel with a motion sensor to record activity on actograms, as shown in Figure 1. Footnote: circadian comes from the Latin word circa, which means around. Whether it's a bacterium, a plant, or an animal, all organisms generally have some kind of circadian rhythm, generally based on our light-dark period within 24 hours. Please take a moment, pause the video, study the diagram, read the caption, look at your X and Y axis. For the investigation, adult male mice were individually housed in cages in a soundproof room at 25 degrees Celsius. Each mouse was provided with adequate food, water, bedding material, and a running wheel. The mice were exposed to daily periods of 12 hours of light and 12 hours of dark, L12, D12, for 14 days, and their activity was continuously monitored. The activity data are shown in Figure 2. Please take a moment, pause the video, study the diagram, read the caption. After 14 days in L12, D12, the mice were placed in continuous darkness, and their activity on the running wheel was recorded as before. The activity data under DD conditions are shown in Figure 3. Once again, pause the video, study the diagram, read the caption. Part A. Please answer this question. It will require one sentence per bullet point. Go. Part B. Please describe the activity pattern of the mice during the light and dark periods in L12, D12. Go. Part C. We're describing one difference between the daily pattern under L12, D12 and under DD conditions. Make sure to support the claim using data. Go. Part D. To investigate the claim that exposure to light overrides the genetically controlled circadian rhythm, the researchers plan to repeat the experiment with mutant mice lacking a gene that controls circadian rhythm, predict the observed activity pattern of the mutant mice under L12, D12 conditions and under DD conditions that would support the claim that light overrides the genetically controlled circadian rhythm. Footnote: when you see mutant mice, don't think that they are ill or that they're deformed. Scientists today can breed mice with certain genes removed. We call them knockouts. They can do it with all sorts of organisms. They're simply controlling the expression of genes within an organism. There's nothing wrong with the mice except they're missing that gene. Go. And Part E, describe two features of a model that represents how the predator-prey relationship between the birds and mice may have resulted in the evolution of the observed activity pattern of the mice. Footnote: the word model. Simply picture in your mind birds hunting mice during the day. That's your model. You don't have to have anything physically built. Just describe that image in your mind, answer the question, go. So how'd you do? A lot of people find this to be a pretty tough question. So here's our rubric. So for Part A, you could get a maximum of 3 points. you needed to say a photoreceptor would simply detect light or dark, or it would send a signal regarding light or dark. For the brain, you need to say somehow that it's coordinating or processing or making sense of information. The motor neuron does not itself move, but it transmits signal from the brain to an effector. And you don't need to have the word effector, but an effector is a muscle, a gland, or an organ, and it is stimulated by a signal from a motor neuron. Part B, you're describing the activity pattern of the mice. 3 possible ways you could phrase this: active during dark phase and inactive during light phase. That's simply all you had to say. Notice the second 2 bullet points are both still comparing light and dark. If you don't somehow mention both light and dark, you would not earn the point. Part C, describing one difference between daily patterns under the L12, D12, and the DD conditions. You can get a point for a description that you see there, and the support is a little trickier, but without the light, the active or inactive periods are determined only by the genetically controlled circadian rhythm. 24-hour circadian rhythm pattern of activity in total darkness would be the same as a pattern in L12, D12. Part D, with the genetically knocked out mouse, 2 possible ways that you could predict this. Under the L12, D12, you'd see a normal rhythm, and under the total darkness conditions, you may have written that there was no pattern or rhythm, or they would be continuously active or constantly inactive. Part E, talking about a selective advantage. Well, if the mice are active at night, they will be selected for, meaning that they will survive and they will reproduce. If you're active during the daytime, well, the birds are more likely to capture you and kill you, so you are more likely to be preyed upon. The key of evolution is that you are reproductively successful. You live long enough to mate and pass on your genes to the next generation. So that would be something that you need to include to get the 2 points possible in Part E. Here's a student sample. So if we read this, this student would get a point for their first statement that the photoreceptor detects light. Brain would send an impulse to the motor neurons based on light levels to start running on the wheel. There's no point there. We're not really talking about processing or integrating information. But they do get a point in the last portion about what a motor neuron does, sending an impulse to move muscle tissue. They continue with Part B, and they get both points there for describing the conditions in light and dark with the activity on the running wheel. Part C, read it over. They do not earn any point in Part C. They're not using the data correctly to describe what's going on. Part D, they do earn a point for saying the activity of these mutant mice would be random in the L12 conditions along with the DD conditions, and they're actually only correct for the randomness in the DD conditions. In Part E, they are earning a point for describing selection correctly about being inactive during the day and less likely to be killed. And they're also earning a point for describing the reproductive success. There were a lot of mistakes that the chief reader noted the year that this question was given. Motor neurons do not directly move themselves. They cause a muscle to activate. Part B, a lot of students did not mention both the light and the dark. Part C was the most difficult portion. Very few students recognized that the active period was shorter than 12 hours or the active period began later each day on the actograms. Part D, most students thought with the mutants that there would be no rhythm under any condition. And with the evolution question at the end, most students said, yeah, being active at nighttime would be a survival advantage, but they did not carry it on to the likelihood that you'd survive and pass on their traits. So the year this question was given, out of 10 points, the mean on this was 3.81. So it was a challenging question that year. Please take a moment, reflect on how you did and anything else you may have learned about trying to answer free response questions. Hope this was helpful.